they keep coming. 2 million illegal immigrants in California. The federal government won't stop them at the border, yet requires us to pay billions to take care of them. Governor Pete Wilson sent the National Guard to help the Border Patrol. But that's not all.
For Californians who work hard, pay taxes, and obey the laws, I'm suing to force the federal government to control the border. And I'm working to deny state services to illegal immigrants. Enough is enough.
Governor Pete Wilson.
We're talking to Assemblyman Tim Donnelly, and we're talking about illegal immigration. Mr. Donnelly, the ad we just saw was from 1994, a campaign ad for Mr. Pete Wilson, Governor Pete Wilson. That was 18 years ago. Can you tell us what has changed? Because it seems like we're talking about the same issues. What has changed the last 18 years, or conversely, what hasn't changed?
Well, what hasn't changed is there's an unwillingness by most candidates and most elected officials to do anything. People talk real tough. We saw it with Meg Whitman right up to the primary about addressing this deep-seated issue that affects California more than perhaps any other state in the nation. And then they get in office, and all of a sudden they just kind of turn the other way and walk away. And here's the interesting thing. We saw what happened with Pete Wilson. I mean, he was losing his campaign for governor until he embraced Prop 187.
And on the flip side of that, some people would say that he also kind of woke up the sleeping giant, which was the Latino vote. Do you think that's a possibility?
See, I don't buy that. I hear that all the time, and we hear this talk of a Latino vote. I don't think there is a Latino vote. You know, just like I don't think there's a white vote. As a matter of fact, I get deeply offended at being called white because I'm kind of a fleshy, pinkish tone. You know, so there are people who are conservative, and there are people who are liberal, and then there's the rest of us who, you know, live somewhere in the middle, and we might be really conservative on fiscal issues. And that's where illegal immigration intersects, and you wind up having Republicans, Democrats, Independents. Let's take this whole effort I'm doing right now to repeal the DREAM Act. 40% of the people who are supporting my effort are Latino. Back in Prop 187 days, with the, you know, referencing the ad you just showed, the polling was somewhere hovering at between 50 and 60% of Latinos were deeply offended by illegal immigration because we all want our kids to do better than us.
So the sentiments haven't changed, but policy-wise, what has changed? What improvements have been made?
Well, we've had zero improvements. As a matter of fact, we went from this costing us somewhere around $3 or $4 billion a year to where now it's anywhere from 11 to 22 billion, depending on whose numbers you believe. Just take Los Angeles County Supervisor Mike Antonovich. He's shown where the County of Los Angeles is paying $1.6 billion, you know, for services to those who are in the country illegally. And I just think that when you create an incentive, a market-based incentive, people are going to respond to it. So I think the focus of the ad is incorrect. By focusing on those who are coming here for a better life, especially now when their country is racked by a drug war that's been going on for over a decade, it just seems the wrong focus. We ought to be focusing on these worthless politicians who think they can pander to what they call the Latino vote, but really it's the illegal vote. And the illegal vote has two components. It has those who have come here illegally who would like to stay and become citizens. And it really, you have politicians using them as pawns. And then on the flip side, the people who fund this are the businesses who would like to exploit the illegal labor because they really don't, they're tired of complying with all these regulations and they would like to just bypass them. And I think it's really troubling that we've allowed those people to hijack the political debate in California.
The cost of illegal immigration. What do you consider to be the cost? How does it dampen our economy? What other non-tangible costs are there?
Right now, we spend a tremendous amount, somewhere between 40 and 60% of the California state budget on education. And yet, we are close to being dead last in results. And a part of that, a component of that, obviously, is that when Prop 187 was literally just thrown out, it was just thrown onto a shelf. 70% of the people supported it, and it was just summarily ignored by a judge and never adjudicated. And one of the components of that was going to be to secure the K through 12 education for legal California residents, which makes a lot of sense. You have legal California residents who are paying in most of the taxes. And so as soon as we lost control of that, and we left the border wide open, and we left all of these incentives in place. So you have somebody coming here to work, and look, I have nothing but empathy for them. I mean, if you are living in a war-torn country where you can't provide for your family, you'd be nuts not to come here, especially if we're going to give you free medical care, free K through 12 education, free college, in-state college tuition for the last decade. And now, in the middle of one of the biggest budget deficits we've seen in modern times, a growing deficit that just doubled in the last couple of months from $4 billion to $9.2 billion, we're going to create a massive new entitlement program. So if you haven't come here yet illegally, you're completely insane. As a matter of fact, we might send a jet for you to bring you here so we can give you free college tuition. And let me tell you something, this is not a Latino thing. When AB 131 passed, this was one of the #1 news stories on Google in China.
So you wouldn't blame then the legal immigrants that are coming to this country then?
No, I think that their motivations are survival, and they want a better life. But
well, let's talk about the demand side, because you did mention it. From the business aspect, here's a quote from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the statement they put out. It says there are an estimated 10 to 11 million undocumented migrants in the U.S., and deporting them would be the equivalent of removing the population of the state of Ohio, not a realistic option. As a country, we're facing an aging population and a severe shortage of workers to fill essential jobs. How do you feel about that stance?
First of all, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and everyone who has a stake in the illegal immigration complex always states 11 to 12 million. That number was the same number in 2005 when I went to the border and President Bush was talking about amnesty, and we watched a 5,000% increase in crossings every time he mentioned the word amnesty. So when I hear that, I have to chuckle. I think we have somewhere between 10 and 12 million illegals potentially here in the state of California. As far as nationwide, I think the number is closer to 30, maybe 36 million. And that is backed up by people who have done studies on this, who are serious about it. So first of all, they always understate the problem. Second of all, you just have to look at the motivation. In the agricultural industry, you have people who are literally being trafficked in here and sold into the fields as virtual indentured servants or modern-day human slaves. And they have no way to pay off their bill. And you have people who are benefiting immensely, charging $300-400 a month for them to have some spot on somebody's living room in a house where 30-40 people are sleeping in each room. I mean, this is absolutely insane that we would tolerate this. And I'm not saying that the ag companies are necessarily behind it. There's a whole underworld of traffickers who are profiting off this, and many of them are profiting off their own people. And they're inviting them to come here and telling them about this great American dream, but when they get here, it all turns out to be a hoax and an illusion, and it's really a nightmare.
So there was a recent news story about 2 weeks ago that an owner of a French restaurant in San Diego was cited. He was fined, put on probation for 5 years, but they were fined nearly $400,000. Are you in favor of employer sanctions like this that punish employers who hire illegal aliens?
Absolutely. Let's look at it from a simple point of view that you almost never hear discussed. By employing people who are illegally here and mostly are paid under the table, those wages are not captured in the income tax stream. So you're not having personal income tax paid to the state of California, which is our largest source of revenue. Right now, with the bad economy, we have 2.5 to 3 million people out of work. There's an awful lot of people that would take restaurant jobs, construction jobs, and other jobs that they might not have wanted to take 5 years ago, but they need a fallback right now. If we capture their wages, that immediately accrues to the California State Treasury. It accrues within 2 weeks to a month. We don't have to wait a year. That would be the quickest way to get our economy turned around. Instead, by not enforcing our laws and not having sanctions against employers who do this, we allow them to essentially be here illegally, to have their kids here illegally, and so they become a burden because there is a cost. There's a cost for schooling, for health care, for fire and police services and everything else, but they're not paying on this side of the ledger, and we have Americans who are out on unemployment. So once again, on the cost side of the ledger, so we're literally killing ourselves financially by tolerating something that isn't good for anybody, arguably, except for the exploiter.
Okay. Well, I'd like to talk about the California DREAM Act, and we'll do that right after the break.